More than a dozen Russian rocket launchers, armored vehicles, and even a heavily modified Mutant tank were wiped out in just a few hours. And all of it happened under the pressure of cheap Ukrainian drones that cost only a few hundred to a few $1,000s. This level of destruction looks unreal because it shows a new kind of imbalance where low-cost FPV aircraft can erase weapons that normally shape entire offensives. Across areas Russia once called safe zones, from flattened villages to quiet forest edges, Ukrainian drones broke into ammo stacks, slipped through open hatches, and struck North Korean MLRS launchers before their crews had any chance to hide. These attacks reveal a deeper threat because they strike at the core of Russia's Soviet-style battle plan, which depends on heavy artillery, massed MLRS fire, and long armored pushes that expect to move faster than enemy targeting. If cheap drones can break that system, the foundation of Russia's ground assault strategy begins to crack, and the battlefield becomes a place where speed, numbers, and armor no longer guarantee survival. And the biggest question now sits in the middle of the conflict. If Ukraine has discovered the blind spot of Russia's armored structure, then the next phase of this war may not follow any pattern seen before. The rapid loss of multiple MLRS units is becoming a clear signal that Russia's long-range firepower is starting to break under constant drone pressure. Russian crews placed a North Korean M1991 launcher behind the ruins of a collapsed building because they believed the damaged structure would block Ukrainian surveillance. The position looked safe from a distance, and the launcher still carried a full load of rockets. The calm atmosphere changed when an FPV aircraft moved in from the rear and struck the ammunition stack sitting on top of the system. The impact triggered a violent reaction, and one of the rockets shot forward through the cabin before the crew had time to understand what happened. The device ended quickly when a second drone passed into the same spot and destroyed the entire launcher before any rescue group could arrive. A similar outcome unfolded on another sector, where the launcher was hit so fast that the entire system was disabled before it could reposition. The 9K-51 systems often attempted to drive away as soon as they finished a strike because their thin armor offered no protection against incoming threats. Each retreat route turned into a trail that the drones could follow, and the sky above these positions filled with FPV units that circled patiently until they found the exact place where the crews stopped to reload or hide. Once the drones identified the resting point, the next strike hit with precision and set off the full ammunition load that each launcher carried. The blast left almost nothing behind and forced nearby soldiers to pull back from the shockwave. These repeated losses created a ripple effect on Russian operations because each destroyed launcher reduced the number of long-range attacks that commanders could plan. The Russian strategy relied heavily on massed salvos that shaped the battlefield and pushed Ukrainian forces away from defensive lines. When several multiple launch rocket system units disappeared in the same week, the pace of Russian activity slowed across wide stretches of the front. Units that previously depended on constant rocket fire no longer received the same level of support, and officers had to reposition remaining systems to cover more ground. This redistribution added more pressure on crews who were already dealing with drone threats every time they tried to fire a single volley. The shift also changed Ukrainian behavior because each destroyed launcher encouraged drone operators to hunt for the next target. The success of the FPV teams created a cycle in which every detected flash from a rocket launch became the start of a new chase. Ukrainian crews coordinated through real-time channels that connected reconnaissance drones with attack units, and the entire process turned into a moving kill chain. The moment a 9K-51 fired its rockets, a tracker marked the plume and calculated the angle of fire. The attack drone then moved toward the predicted route until it spotted the launcher. This method left the Russian side with fewer ways to hide and shortened the time they had to relocate before another FPV hit them. These developments raise a question for countries that closely monitor the war in Ukraine. Russian forces face growing pressure as each MLRS loss reduces their ability to conduct deep strikes. The pattern suggests a long-term challenge that cannot be solved quickly because the threat comes from small aircraft that cost far less than the equipment they destroy. The future tempo of Russian operations now depends on whether they can protect their launchers or whether Ukraine's drone teams will continue to chip away at the core of their firepower. Russian field supply points are becoming prime targets for Ukrainian drones because the structure of these sites creates a chain reaction once a single strike lands. Ukrainian reconnaissance teams spotted one of these locations when a quadcopter scanned a damaged tree line and noticed several soldiers gathering mortar rounds and anti-tank mines in a single pile. The movement looked harmless at first, but the pattern of stacking ammunition in one exposed corner revealed a clear weakness. The crew on the ground likely believed that a quick resupply would pass without notice. Their assumption collapsed when the drone hovered long enough to record the exact position and pass the data to an FPV team waiting nearby. The attack aircraft flew low across dry soil and moved straight toward the ammunition cache. The pilot aimed for the center because any hit in that area would create an immediate reaction. The explosion arrived a moment later, and the blast consumed every item in the pile. Fragments of stored mines and mortar rounds scattered across the clearing while smoke pushed upward in a thick column. The shock wave rolled through the field and struck a supply truck that had arrived only minutes earlier. The vehicle caught fire as more rounds ignited under the spreading flames. The crew around the truck tried to pull back, but the temperature rose too fast and forced them to retreat deeper into the tree line. This pattern of destruction shows that Russian logistics remains centered around large collection points that depend on speed rather than protection. A single stack of supplies can turn into a beacon once a reconnaissance aircraft locks onto it. The moment a drone tracks the movement of crates or fuel cans, the information moves through a communication chain that is fast enough to launch an FPV strike within minutes. Each explosion at a supply site slows the entire formation nearby because resupply teams must reorganize and gather new ammunition from safer positions. These delays force officers to hold back mortar units that depend on a steady flow of rounds. Battery commanders may attempt to fire fewer volleys to avoid running short, but this reduction in output gives Ukrainian positions more time to strengthen their cover. The disruption spreads outward as vehicle crews must adjust movement routes to avoid the burned zones that mark earlier strikes. The impact reaches troop morale as well because soldiers know that any exposed crate could draw a drone within seconds. The slowdown in Russian activity becomes more visible when several field depots are destroyed in the same sector. Mortar teams may go silent for long stretches because the supply chain behind them cannot recover quickly. Frontline infantry may be forced to wait for new deliveries from rear bases that sit farther from the contact line. These delays give Ukrainian drone groups enough time to shift to new targets and repeat the cycle of discovery and disruption. The result is a pattern where cheap, unmanned systems slow down entire clusters of Russian forces without engaging them directly. This trend raises a question for viewers who follow how armies adapt to battlefield threats. Russian logistics continue to rely on large, concentrated supply points, while Ukrainian drones take advantage of every exposed stack of ammunition. Russian armored units are facing growing pressure because FPV aircraft are now striking the very structure that once gave these vehicles their strength. Ukrainian operators focus on the weak points of each system, and this approach is turning many attacks into sudden collapses that leave crews with no room to respond. One scene shows how an APC moving along a narrow road came under drone observation when its engine noise echoed across a broken tree line. The vehicle tried to pick up speed, but an FPV unit flew toward the exposed flank and hit the lower section near the suspension. The blast forced the APC to stop in the middle of the path while smoke leaked from the damaged hull. The crew attempted to climb out and move behind the vehicle, but a second drone closed in before they could recover their gear. The entire vehicle turned into a burned shell that blocked the route for any other unit trying to advance. A different case unfolded near a collapsed hangar where Russian troops tried to hide an armored vehicle under a broken roof. They believed the damaged building would interrupt radio signals and prevent drones from tracking their movements. Ukrainian teams responded by launching a fiber-optic FPV aircraft that did not rely on radio links. The pilot maneuvered with slow movements because the cable behind the drone needed steady handling. The aircraft followed the outline of the hangar wall until it found an open hatch left by the Russian crew. Once the drone entered the interior space, the strike landed at a point where the armor did not provide any resistance. The blast tore through the inside and the roof shook as fire rolled out of the open doorway. The hangar became a trap that helped the drone, rather than the soldiers who tried to shelter there. The most dramatic event appeared when a modified Russian tank known as a Mutant tank came into view. This vehicle carried several layers of metal screens and improvised plates designed to stop FPV impacts. Ukrainian units sent one aircraft after another toward the tank because each hit only damaged the outer layer. The crew inside tried to move forward with small turns to keep the armor aligned toward the incoming threats. The drone operators continued their attacks, and each new strike created a deeper dent in the structure. The tank burned in place while the crew escaped through a rear exit. These events also reveal how vulnerable armored systems become when they lack protection against low-angle attacks. Many Russian vehicles do not carry strong shields on the top section because older designs concentrated armor on the front and sides. FPV aircraft now take advantage of this gap and approach from above where the plates are thinner. A drone falling from a steep angle can slip between gaps in external screens and strike the engine cover, or turret roof. This trend raises an important question about the future of armored warfare because crews face threats that their vehicles were never designed to handle. Ukrainian forces are gaining control of key forest lines because they combine tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, drones, and ground troops into one coordinated strike system. The first major action began when a Leopard tank moved along the outer edge of a damaged tree line and opened fire to stop Russian supplies from reaching forward units. The tank fired round after round into the areas where Russian trucks normally passed, and each strike forced drivers to halt behind the trees. The shock from the tank's fire disrupted Russian movements because the crews could not predict where the next shot would land. This suppression gave Ukrainian infantry more time to move through the woods because the enemy could not send reinforcements across the open ground. The Leopard also shifted positions after each burst to avoid counterfire, and this constant movement kept Russian units confused about the tank's exact location. As the tank held the supply route at risk, a Bradley infantry fighting vehicle advanced from a separate direction and targeted a Russian APC that tried to break through the line. The Bradley used its Bushmaster 25mm cannon to fire a long burst from a distance that surprised the Russian crew. The shells hit the engine block, and the APC came to a sudden stop. Ukrainian soldiers watching from nearby positions reported that the target was disabled before it could deploy any infantry. The vehicle then shifted behind a small ridge to reload and prepare for the next movement. Drone units then moved into the center of the operation because they had a clear view of trenches and dugouts hidden inside the woods. The operators released several small aircraft carrying explosive charges and guided them toward firing points where Russian troops had been seen earlier. Each drone followed a path through the trees and dropped its payload into openings that soldiers used for shelter. The detonations forced Russian defenders to retreat deeper into the tree line and opened gaps that Ukrainian infantry quickly used. The combination of drone strikes and armored fire created a layered threat that left the defenders struggling to respond. Ground troops moved forward in small groups and advanced cautiously along the forest floor. They checked each section of trench with short bursts of rifle fire and grenades before jumping inside to secure the area. Several Russian artillerymen were captured when they tried to hide near damaged equipment. Ukrainian soldiers signaled the captures to command and continued to sweep the next line of cover. This careful method allowed them to push forward without exposing themselves to hidden mines or snipers. The troops relied on constant updates from drones flying above the trees because each movement depended on knowing where the next threat might appear. The entire operation shows that Ukraine is using a NATO-style mini-system, where 5 layers of combat support each other in real time. Each part works with the others, and the combined effect produces steady gains in terrain that once favored Russian defenders. Russian offensives are slowing down because many of their attacks now collapse the moment they move in large and exposed groups. Ukrainian drones and artillery are using this weakness to strike every formation that follows old patterns of Soviet-style tactics. One major incident unfolded when a Russian mechanized column moved directly toward a suspected Ukrainian line without checking the ground ahead. The vehicles advanced in a tight formation, and the lead unit rolled onto a mine that Ukrainian engineers had placed earlier. The explosion lifted the front section of the vehicle into the air, and the shockwave halted the entire column. The crews inside the stalled vehicles tried to turn around, but Ukrainian artillery began firing at the group and forced them to stay in place. The situation became worse when several FPV aircraft entered the area and hit each vehicle that was stuck on the road. Each strike produced secondary blasts that turned the column into a line of wreckage before any unit could escape into cover. A second incident took place on open farmland where a Russian motorcycle detachment attempted to cross an empty field at high speed. The riders moved in a straight row toward a distant tree line in an attempt to flank Ukrainian positions. Drone operators watching the field noticed the dust trails behind the motorcycles and launched several FPV units from hidden positions. The first drone caught the lead rider, and the explosion sent the vehicle sliding across the dirt. The rest of the group tried to scatter, but the flat terrain gave them no protection, and they were struck one at a time. The open sky above the field allowed drones to attack from multiple angles, and the entire team was neutralized before reaching any Ukrainian position. Another scene showed how drones target even the smallest signs of movement. A Russian ammunition truck drove behind a broken barn to deliver rounds to a mortar unit. A reconnaissance drone captured the truck as the crew began unloading boxes near the doorway of the structure. An FPV unit then approached the truck from the rear and detonated near the fuel tank. The flames spread quickly because soldiers nearby carried fuel cans and ammunition belts that ignited as the fire moved outward. Even men who tried to escape on foot were spotted by another drone and forced to run deeper into the tree lines. Several soldiers hid in nearby damaged buildings or walls, but the drone circled above the structure until it identified the hiding spot and delivered a final strike that removed the entire shelter. These events reveal that Russian forces still rely on advancing in straight lines and keeping units close together because this method once created overwhelming strength. The same weakness appears when troops move in the open because drones respond faster than infantry can change direction. Ukraine is taking full advantage of these gaps by switching to swarm-style drone warfare, where many aircraft and small ground robots work together to overwhelm any Russian formation. This method allows Ukrainian units to strike targets even when they hide behind ruins or try to relocate quickly. The pressure created by unmanned systems increases each week because Russian units must move carefully while Ukrainian operators only need a brief moment to launch another attack. The next stage of the conflict may depend on whether Russia can break away from old methods or whether these repeated mistakes will continue to create costly defeats. Drone strikes are no longer support tools because they have become the main force shaping this war, and they can wipe out armored vehicles and MLRS units in just a few minutes. The destruction of Russian launchers, APCS, and even a reinforced Mutant tank shows that old firepower structures are struggling against cheap machines that fly low and strike fast. Ukraine is pushing this shift further by linking drones with Leopard tanks, Bradley vehicles, and infantry teams, creating a kill chain that breaks supply hubs and clears forest lines where Russian units once felt secure. Russia is trying to adjust with extra armor plates, motorcycle teams, and new shelters. Yet every attempt meets the same problem because drones evolve faster than any traditional tactic. The key issue now is whether Russia can update its battlefield approach before these losses turn into long-term damage. Each week makes it clearer that the side with the stronger drone network will decide the tempo of the conflict. The future of this war may depend on how quickly drones gain speed, range, and accuracy, because each step forward reduces the value of heavy vehicles that once ruled land combat. The next phase could redefine tanks, MLRS systems, and armored pushes from the ground up. What do you think will shape the battlefield in 2025? Leave your thoughts below and remember to like, share, and subscribe to Military Force for more frontline analysis.